So I'm going to take a different angle than our previous speakers, and what I thought I'd talk about is the research agenda, how to come up or think about coming up with a topic. You've done your job market paper, but that's just the first of hopefully many papers. And I think it's something that I see students, and I have struggled as a student and early on, is that what's my next paper? How do I think about that? So to do that, I'm going to take you through a quick tour of corporate finance research since about the late 80s when I started my PhD program. And then just to show you how, you see the parallel of what was published and what's going on, how maybe to think about coming up with ideas as you go forward. And then I have been fortunate or not to be our department chair since January 2016. So it's only been 2 years, but really it's baptism by fire. So I do want to give some perspective, starting a new position from my perspective as a department chair. Hopefully some advice or how to think about it is when you start that position. So I think when I think about research topics or what's been published in corporate, I do think some of the papers we see are like deep thinking about what it is why does the firm have a certain capital structure, right? Really a lot of thinking about those deep paper issues. But then I think a lot of what we see over time is really motivated by what goes on in the world and how it relates to corporate finance decisions. And that could be something in the business and macro environments. It can be regulatory changes, as Kathleen spoke about, and how that may impact what a manager thinks or how they do their financing of real investments. And financial innovation. The area of risk management research on the empirical side did really not exist until, the early 90s. And in part, we had regulatory changes that created uncertainty for firms, and then we had the birth of derivatives. And then we had the accounting changes and regulation that allowed us to, as researchers, go and look at some of the data that firms might report. And if you have any understanding of, I know some about risk management, I think, innovation, regulation, new data kind of go hand in hand. We had the derivatives innovations, we had some hiccups or debacles, we got more regulation, more disclosure, we had more innovation to think about how to manage those regulatory changes and disclosures, and then that cycle keeps going on and on. So I think, quote, what is hot is really a function of what is happening around us in the world, and also relating it back to the fundamental research and theories and economics that we study. So, I remember starting looking for a paper, and I've seen others do that, where you just say, I'm going to take the newest edition of the Journal of Finance and read every article. And I'm going to figure out in my area, what are they missing. But, you don't always want to just be reading and reading and reading. You need to, read not beyond the academic papers, but say, look at the news. Read the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, New York Times, and also just think about the world that we're living in. Okay, so, here's not going to go through all these points, but notice that, on the left, on the late 80s side, are the topics that were pretty common or relevant that we saw in the research since the late 80s and early 90s. And you can then see, if you look at what was going on in the world, there were things that motivated that research. We had the takeover boom of the 80s. That's where we had, leveraged buyouts. We had takeovers that, were mismanaged or mismanaged firms that motivated the leveraged buyouts. The Japanese stock market was becoming an interest, as was the Keiretsu system of Japan. Right, so I was fortunate to work with one of my committee members on a paper related to directors with the Japanese market and Keiretsu groups. Okay, we had a lot of debt going on with the LBOs, and then of course we had bankruptcy. So then we had research on is it Chapter 11, immediate liquidation, and a new area of research. We had internationally people started thinking about bankruptcy and legal laws, and then we also had the financial development and Japanese Keiretsu. So you can see that these ideas just didn't appear in the journals, right? People were motivated to think about what it is around us and how does that relate to some of the fundamental economic theories that we have, and they kind of go parallel when you're thinking about new research or what to do next. And along the way, the sources of data also were increasing, and the availability of maybe machine-readable data. Now we're at the extreme where there's so much data that you got to figure out where the information is in the data. If we continue through our history, the 90s continued. We have entrepreneurial finance, risk management, my favorite area, derivatives use, behavioral finance, behavioral economics started to be, we thought about that as well. Corporate finance, and again, law and finance. Corporate governance, executive compensation, increasingly we see that in the early 2000s, private equity, new sources of finance, international corporate. And I think in the recent years, anything related to the financial crisis or sovereign debt crisis, either before or after recovery, M&As are back. I think the more research we see in there, we had financing was inexpensive in the early 2000s in the crisis, and now we're back to we see M&As and more interest in that. Someone earlier spoke about culture. We see culture. How do you measure that? How do we think about that in corporate culture? There's some work. What does that mean for my area in risk management? How do we measure it? But there's interest there. The other area that I think, with the globalization in the economy and interconnectedness that we see, third party, both, what it is about the supply and customer, the supply chain, how does that affect our financial decisions or investment decisions, and what does that mean from risk management? Okay, so the areas that we see in some of the even job market proposals I saw when I was reading, are related to what's going on. So I think there's, as I said, research is motivated by the theories and economic questions. And it's related to, what is it going on in our world around us as it impacts corporate. So I think you have to kind of balance both of those and just, read, but think and talk. What's next? I wish I knew, so, maybe I'd share, but it is impossible to know. But I think there are fundamental changes in the economy, and these affect how corporate finance will be practicing. So as I've been, saying, a reasonable approach would be to understand those implications, right? So once you get your PhD, it's, you don't know everything. It's always about learning new things, and be it econometric techniques, be it how to capture the data. I've always, most of my research, or a fair, not most, but is a hand-collected data set. I'd like to see the data on a spreadsheet. I move slowly into spinning and working with CompuStat. Now there's data, there's so much, but the techniques of capturing it have made it easier. Do I have, in textual analysis? So, look around not only on the shifts and what's interesting, but the shifts going on in technology that allow you to be capitalize on that as a researcher. I do have one note, and maybe it's become a little bit of a pet peeve. My PhD is in economics, which finance is part of. And every time I see, not every time, but more and more, I have a great natural experiment, and I've got this really neat database. And it's like, well, great, but many times you hear these papers, and someone always is asking, well, what's the economics? Like, what is the question you're trying to answer? So, and we joke sometimes looking back at papers that we had that are well cited from the 90s, and it's like, wow, I'm not so sure I had that neat experiment, or that what was being today. But my point is that you would want to really think of something what's going on, what is the question I want to address? Okay, now what are the databases that I need? And if there's an econometric issue that I do need some sort of instrument or a natural experiment, okay, let me go think about how to do this. Okay, because sometimes I really do see students talking and saying, well, I've got this database and it's great data, because, they come in and it's okay, so what do you want to ask about it? Or what's your question? I mean, you can only describe a database that's, this neat database for so long in a seminar, right? And then people start asking you questions, and it's obvious that you know this database, but there's not, why do we care answer, right? All I heard when I was coming up with the topic was, why do I care? And to say because you want to graduate, I need a topic, is not the answer they want to listen to, right? So you got past that hurdle, but as you do a research agenda, you still need to be thinking, why do I care? And what can I take from this study? So when you think about what's going on to motivate some research, there is increased globalization. There's a lot of development in capital markets through innovation, and Kathleen spoke about that. What is the role of alternative capital in risk management? What's it mean that we have, hedge funds and private equity funds coming into the reinsurance and actually in the insurance market? What does it mean for opportunities for me to, manage my risk, but for the insurers who now have a market disruption in their landscape? Okay, so, and then I think, there's a lot of increased connectivity through clouds and social media, etc. So, when I think about, supply chain, Bloomberg, Capital IQ are capturing some of those relationships, both supply and customer. It's real time, but with all that, will that give us more disclosure about third-party risk? Blockchain is coming, a lot of in the popular press, but that has a lot of implications for risk management, financial institutions, and payments, and third-party risk, which is a real risk right now. Related to risk, and I said alternative capital markets and Brexit and political uncertainty. But when the other area sometimes is like I do work in risk management, and when I think about what CEOs are saying or chief risk officers, some of the risks that they're thinking about aren't what I would have thought maybe when I first thought, about it. And, like succession planning is a huge risk, right? So that's, how do I think about that, in corporate finance? How do I measure or understand if there's a succession plan and what's the benefits or who has it or not? Political uncertainty is on everyone's mind. That's probably moved up to the top. Cyber risk, IT integrity from, risk management. But, these are the things that, keep CEOs up at night or chief risk officers, and, being able to understand and making contributions to the area of research are, take some thinking, but, it keeps your research exciting, right? Because you have to do a lot of hours on the job, and so you better really enjoy what you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to be, it's pretty miserable. Keep that in mind. So I also wanted to spend time on talking about research. Being a new professor, from my perspective as a department chair. As I said, I've been doing this for 2 years, but I've had a lot of different roles in that 2 years. It's amazing when I think about all the things I've had to do and learn quickly. And I think there are, 3 areas of responsibility, and your eyes aren't, you're not playing tricks with your eyes, but yes, research, I put a little bit bigger. Research, teaching, and service. Okay, so it is an extremely important balancing act. And they all matter to varying degrees for tenure and promotion. And across universities, and it will matter in different weighting schemes. I think I've been a victim of this, and I see it happen. It's very easy to say, I'm just so busy, I'm working all the time, but you're focusing on the wrong priorities possibly. It's like when you're a PhD student and you're busy all the time through dissertation avoidance, but you feel like you're busy all the time. So I think it's really easy when, I see people, focus a lot on teaching, which is important, but they're really good at that. So now they've mastered that for what they need to get to the next step, but they keep investing and investing because their research is stuck. And that sometimes can, lead into trouble. I think it's very important that you speak with your department chair early on to understand what the expectations are as you move through your time there for promotion and tenure. It's typically talked about when you are starting a position, or when they're trying to hire you and you're talking about what you want to, what we consider for promotion and tenure, what our expectations are. But I think once you take that position, it's also important to have a conversation with your department chair to make sure you understood and you're on the same page. And hopefully you'll have that conversation as you move through with updates. So let me talk a little about each three of those components. Research, I really would advise, and you probably have heard this, really try to get your job market paper, a chapter of yours, as many different chapters of different papers, submitted by the time you start a new job, right? Because typically it's probably at that point about, and you just really get the comments from the job market once you go through them and see which ones really are good comments or not, and talk to your advisors. And then, get it submitted, so then you start this job, which takes a lot of time and setting up cost that you don't have a lot of time to devote to it. By the time you do, it's come back, hopefully with a good, positive, review. It is difficult to get published. I think that's fair to say. The acceptance rates are low. There's more and more people trying. So I do think it's important to work with co-authors. But as it says up there, I don't think it's always smart to have them be your senior colleagues and your advisors. Because then it can be the question when you go up for promotion and tenure, the contribution. Especially if you don't go to the conferences, the last point. So what is your part? Typically there's always going to be people who say 1/n, but you don't want them to be questioned. So working with, other co-authors, but, maybe having one or paper, I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying that you should think about the balance or your portfolio of research. Co-authoring is also fun, besides just, doing it yourself. But having said that, if your job market paper is not the sole author paper that gets published, I do think, at least I know at Ohio State, it is important that we have a sole authored paper. I mean, it needs to be placed somewhere, and I think having done that, as it says, really demonstrates your ability as a researcher to do research high quality independently from start to finish, and that's a good signal again for promotion and tenure. The last point, go to conferences. I say this, I think this is very, very important, and when I started my job, for whatever reason, I know the reason, but I have a dual career family. My husband worked, not in academics. He traveled a lot. We had 2 small children at home, because of course I thought it made lots of sense to have my firstborn 11 months after I started. But the point being, I didn't go, I think, to as many conferences as possibly I should have. And I do think if I had gone to more conferences early on, then as I had more and more time to travel and wanted to go to conferences, I might have participated more. And people know you, right? People know you, and when you think about impact for when you're going up for tenure, we consider things like, do they go to conferences? Are they invited to discuss? Do you know who they are, right? You want the letter writers to know who you are before they get your papers. So it's easier for them to know who you are if you're going to conferences. Okay, and after the job market conference, all the other, they're out, you're having a lot of fun. You should be having fun now, but it's not as high stressed as it may be when you're on the job market. So go to the conferences. So teaching. If you can, try to minimize your preps during the first 3-4 years and just do multiple sections. It's not always the case that you can. If you're in a smaller department or a department that has really a smaller program, that may not be the case. But if you can, focus on corporate or whatever class you may be teaching in multiple sections. Take it seriously. I mean, especially if you're told research matters, teaching matters. I mean, you have to be good at it, and each department will qualify what's good and what's acceptable. But I think it's, you should really try, importantly, to take it seriously, not think it doesn't matter, it's just research, because it does matter. I think it's a really good idea if you have, they say, wouldn't you want to teach? I think it's great. I think it's a good idea. I did it. We've encouraged others to teach that first semester. Because when you start a new position, you don't know the department. You don't know how the college works, the department. OSU is so large. We have so many rules and papers and forms and whatnot, how to get things even Xerox for a class. So when you're nervous too because you start. Naturally, people are starting a new position. You have a new person there. There's some jitters, I would think. So if you have to teach, you're thrown into figuring out how it works, right? And you're not going to get as much done as you think on research as you think you might if you start teaching in January. But when you're done teaching in the fall, if you don't have to teach the next semester, now you're set up to do your research and you know how it works and you're comfortable. Okay, so if you're given the option of which semester or quarter to teach, I really recommend that you think about doing it the first semester. And don't forget to do your research, because it can get consuming the teaching the first time. So try to schedule at least one day, if you can, for research. Okay, service. I think that, starting, we always say aim for rank appropriate service. Service to the department, less to the college and the university. You should not be carrying your service load for your department when you start the first few years. That's what the people do when they get tenure, or more so when we get full and keep going. We just get more service, it seems. So but when you think about service, we always in our department say, did you come to the seminars when we're job recruiting? Did you help interview at the meetings? Do you work with the students, the PhD students when they come? So those things are serving your department, you're helping, right? So make sure you don't use service as a way to avoid the research, right? Especially if you like to help others. And the last thing is my view of your department chair. I really think that you should look at your department chair, he or she is a valuable resource about the department, the college, and university policies. We may have to look them up, but we actually hopefully know where they are. Remember, they want you in that department. That's why they made you the offer. So that leads to my second point. Your department chair really should be and is an advocate for you, right? They wanted you. They were instrumental in hiring you. Being an advocate for you doesn't mean you get to boss him or her around, but she will, support you and make sure you're the best you can be for the department and yourself. They provide you annual feedback on your research, teaching and service. If this is not a formal part of the department and college policy, I would encourage you to make it something that you ask for every year. At Ohio State, it is formalized. We do this. And the reason you want that feedback every year is so that you do not have a surprise as you go in for tenure thinking it came out of blue or renewal or something. So criticism and feedback is a gift, which sometimes doesn't really seem like it at the time, but it is an important gift that you receive, we all receive, so we think about that. And we do assign your teaching and service workloads. Okay, but more importantly, resource and advocate to help you succeed once you get to your new position. And that's it.